stuff. We're going to talk about the rise of toxic culture in terms of cannibalism. Yes, cannibalism is now being promoted. We're going to talk about weird mainstream admissions. There have been a flurry of mainstream admissions in the last, 2 or 3 months that have really kind of blown me away. Stuff I would have never expected to be just casually thrown out there. Oh, yeah, by the way, this is all true. And yeah, maybe you were a fringe conspiracy theorist, according to us experts, for many years, but now, no, it's all true. But you're still fringe conspiracy, crazy people, because we say so. We're going to talk about that. I want to talk about the realm that I know pretty well, the religious realm. What's going on geopolitically in the religious realm? Well, quite a bit, actually. A lot to do with Ukraine and a lot to do with Pope Francis's Amazon Synod, which is starting, I believe, today or tomorrow. We're going to find out why that's a big deal, why that actually relates to AOC, Greta, the green issues. It does. I know you probably don't believe me, but I assure you it does. I'll prove it to you. And I want to harken back to an interview that I did maybe a month ago with former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras. You've seen Jim on RT in many, many interviews. We had a great talk, and we talked quite a bit about color revolutions. Yes, exactly. Color revolutions and the Ukraine. Mr. Jatras, of course, knows a tremendous amount about the Ukraine situation. He and I have discussed it at length. And we're hearkening back to this because it's back in the news. The rebooting of Russiagate, right? We went from the failed Russiagate of 2 years now to Russiagate 2.0. And really what it looks to me like, and here's the weird part, and I think we'll get Patrick to chime in on this in about 20 or 30 minutes. The weird part to me is that when I first met Patrick was doing a report on the Bundy Ranch, not the Bunny Ranch. Everybody makes this joke. Why did you go to the Bunny Ranch? No. The Bundy Ranch. If you remember the Bundy Ranch fiasco, eminent domain and all that. Well, what came out at that time was that part of the reason that this deal was going down had to do with Biden's son and deals that Biden's son was privy to, right? Now, why is this relevant? Well, Biden's running, right? And now Biden's son is implicated again because he's supposed to have banked on this Ukraine deal, right? There's these corporations that have been set up. We've seen the same thing. By the way, this is true with Pelosi as well. So a lot of the Democrats have these sweetheart deals that they had set up in the Ukraine. And it was contingent, of course, upon the new leader, Poroshenko, being put in. The billions of dollars, of course, of Soros money going in since the late 80s, early 90s into the Ukraine Orange Revolution. And in other words, the plans were made ahead of time from a corporate perspective as to who would get the deals. You see, this is how it works. This is what we learned with Hillary during the election. We saw that a lot of the WikiLeaks pointed to this with the reason that it was so crucial to have color revolution and then Islamic revolution in North Africa, right, in Libya, was because of a lot of the corporate deals that were already set up there. And then we're seeing the same thing. It's the same model. It's the same trickery, the same neoliberal economic scammery IMF over and over and over. They do the same thing. And the reason this relates to the green stuff is that a lot of these green people give us the false opposition. They're almost becoming really the face of controlled false opposition. Oh, they're against corporate control, you see. AOC, she even critiques usury. Well, she wouldn't do that if she was a tool of corporate people, would she? Well, of course she would, because it doesn't matter what they say. I mean, what the politicians say obviously does matter in the sense of propaganda and this kind of stuff. But what we need to look at is where they vote and who's backing them and follow the money. When we do that, we begin to see the fraud and scammery of the giant green agenda. Now, I know about this indirectly, not because I was necessarily involved in environmental activism, but just because I'm a bookworm and a nerd, and I read a bunch of books on globalism. The last globalism book talk that I did was this guy, Fritjof Capra. And Frithjof is an interesting character. He does say some interesting things. I don't want to say that he's wrong about everything, but in the late 70s, early 80s, he gained prominence by writing books that talked about science, society, and the rising culture of the future. I think he's first known for his book, The Tao of Physics, right, where he's pointing out similarities between Taoism and discoveries that were being made in the late 70s, early 80s, relating to consciousness, the psyche, and science. All right, well, that's all well and good, but as you can imagine, quite soon after the Tao of Physics, he published The Turning Point, which argued that, look, everything in life is a series of systems. There's systems of economics, there's systems of the environment, right? Nature is a giant system. Human society operates like a big system. It's full of networks and nodes. And he calls this a systems view of life, right? And that sounds reasonable. That sounds, oh yeah, that's true. Okay. But then he goes on to say, and since that's the case, what follows is that you're just a cell within this giant node system. And he says that essentially Gaia is a living entity. So we see how he jumps from these kind of obvious claims into the immediate sort of new agey assumption that, oh, well, so the world is a giant living organism, and therefore humans are merely cells within Gaia, the superstructure of the living universe / Earth. And therefore any cells that don't go along with the collective need to then be purged. Now, let me be clear that I'm not promoting atomistic individualism over against collectivism, and I'm not promoting collectivism over against atomistic individualism. I would critique both of those systems. But the reason that we want to look at Frithjof Capra is that he is a major thinker in terms of the philosophy of the Green Movement. And when we understand his systems assumptions, his systems philosophy, and then how he begins this entire book with dialectics, something you've heard me talk about quite a bit if you listen to Jay's analysis, you know, and you get the distinct impression that this is about the manipulation of dialectics. And so just like AOC, somebody like Capra will come off as a person of the opposition, right? We're going to fight the corporate establishment. And so as I'm reading through Capra, I'm seeing a lot of good points, right? I'm saying, we need to have organic food, right? Well, that sounds good. That's plausible. We need to have less pollution. Oh, yeah, that's a very reasonable idea. And then he even goes so far as to critique scientism, believe it or not. He even goes so far as to say, look, the idea that all that exists is the material world and just bare bones pragmatic science, you know, that's just not enough. It's actually destructive to human society and the environment. And therefore, we need to think in better ways. Now, that sounds great. And what we notice throughout all of these globalism books that I've done 30 plus lectures on now is the same pattern, right? It's always crisis, 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 and many times they identify real crises. But as David Icke and the Cheetah Uri have said many times, this is problem, reaction, solution, because they're giving you their solution to their problems. And that's what's key to see here. And that's why we have to identify these people, even though they say many true things, as controlled opposition. For example, Capra says, look, since biology is a system, since computers are systems, since cognitive mental networks, right, your brain's neural networks are systems, everything is a system, and therefore what we have to do is control all these systems, right? So he's definitely an advocate for more and more, greater and greater technocratic control. So he takes us through this book and says what we're going to see, what we're going to need to have is a return, I kid you not, bear with me here, a return of mysticism, a return of Gaia, a return of the goddess, a return of hallucinogens. Now, again, Frithjof is writing this, just after the, CIA-induced counterculture revolution of the 60s, right? He's writing this in the late 70s, early 80s. So he's saying basically, let's not let this die out. Let's continue the 60s counterculture. And by the way, you can pull up the quote on YouTube if you want. If you doubt me, where Timothy Leary says you can thank the CIA and me for the entire 60s counterculture. He says that. Now, I'm not saying everybody in the 60s counterculture was part and parcel to the vast conspiracy. I'm not being so naive. But overall, the culture creation and steering was definitely foisted by technocrats, foisted by even generals. Right? You had generals who were sitting around tripping acid, figuring out how to control the noosphere, and that's all detailed in the documentary on the internet and MK Ultra and the Unabomber, which is a really good documentary, by the way, if you've not seen it. So Freethoff moves on to say, look, new age ecosystems in the future are going to be integrated. And he's right, actually, right? He was actually correct. And he was saying that we're basically going to use a version of theosophy in the new age to say that everything that was fractured as a result of the Enlightenment, of scientific revolution, of everything being sort of compartmentalized in terms of your education, in terms of society, in terms of how you view the world. I'll give you an example of this. You know, when you go to college, last time I was on with Patrick, we were talking about Darwinism, and I was talking about how professors will go and learn biology and they don't know anything about basic logic. You can quite literally get your PhD in biology, life sciences, and you've never had a logic class. That's how the modern education system in the West works. And even Freethoff, you know, he identifies that as a problem. He says, look, our whole education system has been fragmented since the time of the Enlightenment. In fact, the whole Prussian education model upon which the Western model is built is based on that compartmentalization, fragmenting, division of education. Freethoff says we're going to have to reintegrate everything into one giant mass whole. Now, guess where he goes in the next chapter? Austerity. He says we can't have unlimited growth. How dare you? How dare you with your fantasies of unlimited growth? We have to have austerity. That's what Freethoff says. Have you noticed a similar pattern? I have. In every one of these globalism works, there is the pattern of austerity. This is one of the, I'm going to do a video, I'm going to call it the 10 Commandments of Globalism. And I'm going to derive from these 30 plus books the commonalities that we find in all these guys, right? We'll get into that later, but I just want to point out that this light of the green movement, this pioneer of green philosophy, of holistic integrated ecosystems, of keeping the CIA, LSD, boomer revolution trip alive, Mr. Freethoff Capra, he says it's all going to be top-down control. It's going to be a managerial society. You're not going to have economic liberty. And by the way, I'm not promoting libertarianism. I'm not promoting the free market. I think the free market was a step to get us to where we are, unfortunately. But that's going to go away. You see, that's the old system. That's the old revolutionary system, and revolutionary systems always have to keep revolutionizing. You see, the new physics, he says, has shown us. In other words, quantum physics, according to Capra, has shown us that everything is an integrated whole. And guess where he goes next? Why, he goes to one of the other guys that I covered in the Globalism Book Talk, Mr. Arthur Koestler himself. And of course, Arthur Koestler pioneered this idea of holons, Holon, which he says are organisms that are structured into larger and larger holistic versions of organisms, right? So you're a part of a human society, a family. That family is part of a society. That society is part of a globalist society, you see. You see the reasoning here, right? So because there's a connection between these different realms, these different spheres, then therefore everything is ultimately one. Everything is one giant organism or system. Now, this is dialectics. This is playing off of either ors and arguing that, well, because we're part of larger systems, we must therefore subjugate the particular, the individual, right? You as an individual, okay, yeah, you are an individual, but you only have the individuality within this holistic scheme. Let me give you an example of this, again, from the green perspective here. Peter Singer, right, the animal rights, quote, moral philosopher. Peter Singer says that you don't even have individual identity or personhood until you've been given that identity and personhood by the collective, you see. Now, this is dangerous because it's swinging over to the extreme, swinging over to the collectivist extreme, over against the libertarian atomistic individualist extreme, which we've seen since, again, the rise of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, all those guys, right, who told us, oh, we got to have economic liberty, economic individualism, and then that spills over into social individualism, and everybody's their own little, revolutionary. And then we discover that, when this does appear to create quite a bit of social wealth, now we've got to go back. We've expanded. Now we got to contract. Now you got to have austerity. Now we've had too much growth. There's limits to growth. You see, limits to growth. Right? What was the Club of Rome's first green document? Limits to growth. What needs to come back? Shamanism. Burning Man, man. Burning Man. Bring back Burning Man. That's quite literally what Capra said would come back in 1982. So long before the tech elite, who are all part, by the way, of a secret society within Burning Man, I kid you not, even I was skeptical when I heard this. I think it was Aaron and Melissa of True Stream Media, the great dynamic duo of Aaron and Melissa. They hipped me to this idea, which I was skeptical of. What? A secret society of tech elite at Burning Man? No, surely not. But yes, sure enough. And what are they into? Well, they're into hallucinogens, psychedelics, and burning the man, right? So there's this, again, AOC, controlled opposition. Greta, controlled opposition. Friedrich Capra, controlled opposition. Burning Man, tech elite in a secret society, tripping their mind out on all the hallucinogens that you could imagine at Burning Man. It's all organized according to like a big giant spaceship. It's lunacy. And they view it as a new religion. It's been obviously transhumanist themed for many, many years. Burning Man has. But I'm just pointing out that this was given to you. This was planned. Capra said many, many years ago, 1982. He said the green new economy. He was saying back then, you're going to have a green new economy. And he said it would be organized around new hierarchies, integrated wholes, and shamanism. Now, I'm not trying to knock everybody that, finds Carl Jung and shamanism interesting. I find those things interesting. I'm not knocking that. I'm saying that setting aside what you personally, feel or like or your tastes are about these topics and these archetypes and whatnot, it doesn't matter because from their perspective, these are tools to be manipulated. They're puzzle pieces, chess pieces on the grand chessboard to move and steer people. And that's why Capra continues in his book into a chapter on Carl Jung, a chapter on, I kid you not, schizophrenia. Modernity is creating schizophrenia, he says, and it's creating a double bind where people are going mad. And he says what we need to do is accept this madness as part of our ritual initiation into the coming green new age. I'm kidding you. I kid you not. He says that in the chapter, Journeys Beyond Space and Time. Journeys Beyond Space and Time. Sounds like that. Have you ever heard, is it John Tesh who does that show on NPR or whatever, where it's Sounds of Space? So these initiation ceremonies, he says, will give rise to dissociative identity disorder. They will give rise to more and more psychotics in society, but it's a necessary stage on the process to the green economy. Now, why do I talk about all this? Because it shows the religious component to this stuff. And that's where I wanted to go next. What's beyond Capra, beyond dialectics, beyond controlled opposition is the religious component. And this is where we step into the realm of Pope Francis. Because the controversial Pope has made quite a few overtures, explicit statements, radical statements about where the Roman Catholic world and the religious world as a whole needs to go. Most recently, he was at the United Nations talking about a new global pact for a new humanism. Now, I'm sure some of you skeptic humanist types out there will say, well, what's wrong with this? Who cares? Isn't that stodgy old Roman Catholic institution, doesn't it need to update? Doesn't it need to become more progressive? Well, maybe, but wait a minute. That's not what this is about, you see. This is not about updating things to make it more palatable. This is about the institution being co-opted into the exact same plans that I was telling you about in Copra's Turning Point. Now, if you doubt me, I will assure you that you can go and read somebody like Julian Huxley, the founder of UNESCO, who wrote The Philosophy of UNESCO, which I covered a few weeks ago, actually a couple months ago. Julian Huxley says it's time to co-opt all the religions into this same plan. David Wim Hof, as a book I've mentioned many, many times, an extremely scholarly intelligence analysis, not a conspiracy book, an intelligence analysis, John Courtney Murray, Time Life magazine, and the American Proposition about the CIA's usage of the Roman Catholic Church during the Cold War for what they titled the Doctrinal Warfare Program. What's the point? To co-opt that institution for, at that time, during the Cold War, Americanism. What is Americanism turned into? Globalism, right? The American institutions are now these entities for promoting globalism across the world. And it doesn't really matter whether it's the quote-unquote globalism of like a Huxley or a Bertrand Russell. It's the same as the globalism of Americanism. It's two different flavors in my view. Right? So it's the same problems, two different models, two different playbooks. But Francis says that in this new initiative called the Reinventing the Global Educational Alliance, it's time to bring everybody into a huge global educational pact for a new universal humanism. Quote, that's what he says. He goes on to say, will be about creating fraternity, hospitality, justice, peace, liberty, equality, fraternity is essentially what he says. Where have we heard that before? Well, if you don't know, that's the Jacobin motto of the French Revolution. Francis says that this will call upon people to be proactive in dialogue. You know, that's all they talk about, dialogue. He also met with Islamic leaders a few months earlier to attempt to create a new pact between Roman Catholicism and Islam. And again, this is not because we have people that are wanting to literally have peace. That's not what this is. This is a false peace. Okay, so even if you're a Muslim, I would say to you, I would not think you would want to be allied with Francis, because the Roman Catholic institution, I believe, is a very corrupt, dangerous institution, you see. So this is ultimately, again, as the big globalist writers with whom Francis is totally allied. He has made himself abundantly clear many times over that he is totally allied with globalism on all levels, and therefore he's allied with the propositions of Friedrich Capra, that this is about a new world religion. I know, you think I sound like a crazed fundamentalist, but I've been talking about this a long time because I read 20 years ago. Some of the first things I read that got me woke, that got me red-pilled, were issues that dealt with the coming world religion and plans for the coming world religion. And you can go back to writers like Madame Blavatsky, Annie Besant, right? These people who were very formative in terms of theosophy, in terms of formulating the religious philosophy of the United Nations through the Lucis Trust and so forth. And they said the coming age will be focused on ecology. It will be focused on a world religion. And it will have to steer the many world religions into this giant blob religion. Again, how many times do I have to point out that Aldous Huxley wrote The Perennial Philosophy? And the Perennial Philosophy is about how the new age, the new era, the new aeon will have a giant blob religion where everything is the same. Do you notice a pattern here? The corporatism, the standardization process of corporatism that it creates, well, it just does the exact same thing in the religious realm. It standardizes, corporatizes. Francis goes on to say that this is about healing the planet, and that all of these 216,000 Catholic schools, 60 million pupils, almost 2,000 Catholic universities with 11 million students will be signed on to this global pact of an international global humanist religion. Wow. The global pact. Do you see that the point here is that it's coordinated? These are not happenstance events in one realm of life. Over there's the political, there's AOC and Greta over there. In fact, I believe who spoke right after Greta? Well, it was Francis, you see. I'm speaking here of the infamous viral clip of Greta that has gone haywire the last week. I'm sure we all heard it, right? Patch covered it, I think, last week. Maybe it's been 2 weeks of Greta now. I'm lost in the Greta dimension. I don't even have a sense of space and time. I've heard Greta so many times in the last 2 weeks. I don't even know. It's infinite Greta. That's all I hear in my head. It's just Greta, Greta, Greta. How dare you? How dare you? It is Greta. Greta is the face of the future. Greta is the MK Ultra genetic modified creature that Frida Capra has in mind in his book. You see, that's the vanguard of the revolution that Jacques Attali talked about in his book, Brief History of the Future, who also has many chapters on the green stuff, you see. The green stuff is a corporate scam. That's the key here. And it's not just relegated to the realm of politics, to the realm of economics. It's also in the religious realm. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Why are so many churches now switching over to this green crap? Because they're controlled. And they were bought off a long time ago. All of the Protestant major denomination seminaries were bought off many, many years ago by the Rockefellers. They brag about it in their biography. All they had to do was donate a bunch of money to the Protestant seminaries, create their own seminaries, Union Seminary, for example. Union Seminary this last week, they put out a tweet saying it's now time for students at Union Seminary to confess your sins, literally a confessional, to a bunch of plants. A confessional to a bunch of plants? This is the religion of the future. And it's what Capra said back in 1982 would be the case.